Folks, again, welcome to the Nassau-Suffolk School Boards Association's webinar on social media impact on our youth and 60 days of disconnect. We have a great keynote speaker here who will impress you with her knowledge and her own experience. And this video will also be available on demand on our YouTube channel after this evening's presentation, as well as her slide deck. And we thank you for joining us. And listen, the issue of cell phones is a big issue here in New York. As we all know, the governor is proposing a statewide ban, bell-to-bell ban, about cell phones in schools. And that's been met with some resistance in the state legislature with some varying opinions. And of course, the school board associations also have our own opinions. We believe this is a local decision-making process. But a couple of interesting facts that came out in the most recent on-board issue from the New York State School Board Association: 95% of 13 to 17-year-olds have smartphones. And on average, they receive more than 230 notifications a day. So it's clearly a distraction, clearly an issue. And of course, it's well documented about the impact of social media on our youth and their mental health, and also on the brain. There's actually some science behind this, and we're going to let our speaker get into that a little bit later on. And some of our districts go through digital detox events, and they have their own policies regarding cell phone and social media use in schools and during the school day. But tonight, we're going to hear about one student's journey into disconnecting. And Keegan Lee, we want to welcome her to our webinar this evening. She's a sophomore and honors student and the James R. Copeland and Lillian G. Copeland Scholar at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So, Keegan, before we get into anything, we're going to ask your opinion about the big basketball tournament that's coming up, because down there at down at UNC, that's kind of a big deal. But she is studying psychology and English with a concentration in medicine, science, and literature. She's also an author. She co-authored a book called 60 Days of Disconnect with Dr. Bill Gandauer. Did I say that right? Dr. Bill Gandauer is an award.
Bill Gandor. Yes, very close.
Gandor, okay. An award-winning mental health activist, groundbreaking work exploring the impact of digital disconnection on mental well-being. And I had the pleasure of seeing this speaker down at the National School Board Association a year ago, I think, right? Or maybe 2 years ago? I forget. Just about a year ago down in Orlando, and she was very impressive, and she had the room captivated, and nobody wanted to leave when she was done speaking. So I am confident that she is going to give you some insight and information as policymakers as you all debate what should be done in your schools. And of course, we'll pay attention to what happens on the statewide legislative issue of cell phone bans. But again, this is our effort just to give you some more information from a different perspective. So, Keegan, welcome to the program. And, listen, what are you thinking with the, March Madness? I know where your heart is, but,
Yeah, you know where my heart is. I don't know where my mind is at the moment.
Just keep in mind, you're talking to a bunch of folks from New York, so there's a bunch of Johnnies out there, as I would say.
Well, I mean, the season has been a roller coaster. It's the game that we had against Duke, where we had a very huge, distance between we made a huge comeback at the end, and I think that's one of the reasons why we made the tournament, but we barely made the tournament. So I'm hoping that they can continue to push through and show resilience, but we will see. It's definitely entertaining, that's for sure.
It can impact one's mental wellness on a whole different level, that's for sure. And that's why they call it March Madness. Keegan, why don't you make sure that you can share your presentation, and we'll test out that to make sure you can. If not, we have our backup. There we go. Absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, we're going to turn it over to Ms. Keegan Lee. If you have questions for Keegan during the presentation, put them in the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll try to get questions answered as we go along. But Keegan, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking out the time, and the program's all yours.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. We have quite a bit of content to get through, so I'm going to try to be as concise and also to the point as possible. This is one of my largest passions, and I've been doing this, exploring this topic ever since I was 16 when this all began. And so I'm really, really thrilled to be presenting to you all. You all are in incredible positions of leadership, and it means a lot to me as a 20-year-old that you value my perspective and this point of view coming from a young person who I'm just a sophomore in college, and I'm trying to make my way in this world, and this is one of my passions, and I'm dedicated to continue to pursue it. So we're going to explore the brain on social media today, and we're going to look at various different perspectives. This is a very broad topic, and so we're really only going to scratch the surface, but I've created this presentation to help you all understand what I think that you all really need to know. And so this is sort of the agenda that we have. We're going to cover a lot of topics from psychology, media psychology, and anthropology, social psychology, a lot of different perspectives that you may think may not relate to this, but it very much does. It's a very cross-disciplinary topic, and so I'm very thrilled. So the first thing, you all do not have to interact. I thought whenever I'm in person, this is usually a fun activity that we do. But it's always interesting to see if people from different generations can identify what these acronyms mean, because a lot of people my age are able to understand what they are. And I looked at them and I didn't really know what they meant. But the big picture here is that Generation Z, my generation, some of the younger generations who are digitally native, and even generations that are not so, that were not brought into the world of social media, have adopted some of these norms of trying to create this culture of digital language. And so you think of emoticons, for example, and how we as humans are social creatures, and we use our nonverbals pretty adamantly, and we read nonverbals pretty adamantly, and that sort of portrayal is showing up in the way we are interacting online as well, in the attempt to show nonverbals through emoticons. And so this sort of is creating the question, how does technology reflect what we value and what we want to reflect, and how our need for language and communication is being, altered through the online world, and the benefits to that and the challenges to that. So before we get started,
I was going to ask the question. Go back to the previous slide because it's just burning curiosity for me.
yes.
What does the second one mean? I'm trying to figure it out.
The second one is as far as I know.
Okay,
Um,
because if my son or daughter texted me that to me, I'd probably be a little bit annoyed initially, but now I
yeah,
won't be.
yeah, and there's some where it's obvious, like OMG, people know what that is. By the way, LOL. I think the last one is I just bawled out laughing. Um, some of these are really are less common, but it's funny to think about, and it's always interesting to see what can be recognized, and what people's interpretations are. But the bigger picture is, we've created this digital language, and it's, what does that mean for us as social beings and who we are. And so what I want to touch on is this sort of mobile phone evolution, and we've experienced a shift. They're very quick, fairly quickly. We've been adapting to the changes of technology for a very long time, but we are in an age right now where it's changing at a rapid pace, especially with the evolution and up and comings of artificial intelligence. And what I love to show is, usually I try to bring these with me, just whenever I do these presentations, is I don't have a flip phone, I don't use a flip phone, but I like to show the flip phone, when I have it tangible, especially when I'm in person, I like to show how we've gone from this to this, and it's kind of just showing this shift. And we have to ask the question, how is the way we're designing technology reflecting what we expect from it, and how is it a reflection of our culture and what we value, because it can be argued that our culture is a reflection of what's going on social media, but social media is also a reflection of what's going on in our culture as well. So it's a two-way street. But we had on January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone 4, and this was a very important sort of climactic moment in determining where we want to go with technology, what are the changes we want to make in helping it become more efficient and effective, and it leads to persuasive technology and then persuasive social media, and that's a whole nother realm. And sort of in a different context, we will get to social media. In a different context, there are different perspectives on this as well, even in the sense of mobile wallets and this intergenerational aspect that is going on. This is I like to touch on how different generations are experiencing these shifts very differently. And we have some elders who are having to navigate the changes in technology, and they still carry around cash as I do, as they should, and having to constantly navigate to not only the changes in social media and our phones, but also the world becoming more digital in multiple different contexts. And of course, a lot of my peers don't even really carry the handheld leather wallets anymore. It's all on the phone, which has its pros and cons, I suppose. But yeah, that's just another. These are just some articles that I found. And so now I'm going to take you through my story. So I like to bring sort of the science and the story, because I think both of them together can create a very powerful effect. And so this all really happened a good amount of time ago in 2021, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. And this was a moment in my life in the mix of the pandemic where I found myself to be very consumed by social media, very just constantly had this habitual behavioral response to it all the time, was always hung up on the likes, the comments, and it was a form of gratification for me that became obsessive. And I knew that. I had the self-awareness to understand that. And I sat down with my parents and I said, I want to do something that's sort of like an individual case study. And so I told myself, I'm going to delete social media for 60 days and I'm going to journal my everyday thoughts and feelings and emotions. And that's what I did. And so I kept a physical handheld journal, and I still have it. And I recorded every day my thoughts and feelings. And the first day, so I'm going to take you through this timeline. The first day I deleted it, I was afraid. I was afraid of what other people would think. It's social media, especially during the period of adolescence. It's a place people go to find those who are similar to them, where they can find this sense of belonging and satisfaction in that. And I was one of those. I found a lot of the satisfaction in my connections online, and that was and to an extent that was dangerous. And so I throughout this whole experience, I wanted to find the true meaning of human connection. And so throughout the sort of 2-month cleanse, I had these pivotal moments that would be like light bulb moments where I would be like, oh, this is something that was a problem, and removing something that had been so consistently a part of my life, and then suddenly having to adapt without it, you realize some of these behaviors that you wouldn't have noticed before. And so in January 7th, I was out to dinner with my family, and I noticed that I was just my phone was face up on the table, and my dad said to me, Keegan, are you even aware that you are tapping your phone? And I said no, and I had these robotic, habitual, automatic responses toward my phone, and that was the power of the device on the table, is that it had the power to fracture my attention without ever even triggering my awareness. And that's what we see in a lot of different contexts, but it was like this magic of maybe I'm going to be getting a response and a notification. Even though I didn't have social media, it was a lens into how I would have previously responded, how I had been previously responding toward my phone when I had social media. And that behavior was still carrying over, even though I didn't even have the source of the concern. And so January 16th, I had kind of moved from this withdrawal period, and I was starting to feel more positive and inspired. And I was experiencing things for what they truly offered, rather than just to portray a sense of myself on Instagram. And so there's that saying, if you don't take a picture of it, then it obviously didn't happen. If you don't take a picture and you don't post it on social media, then it obviously didn't happen. And that was a main sort of point that I found, was that I wasn't feeling compelled to experience, to be validated through social media. I was experiencing things because I truly wanted to, and that feeling is so rewarding when you don't feel that pull to portray a sense of your life or curate a sense of your life around this idea of highlight reels and perfection. And so then I started to kind of slowly take off this blindfold and notice the school environment. So I was now looking at my peers, and I had translated from this inward view of myself to looking at the external environment to see how it was affecting other people. And phones in the schools were, in my school, we didn't really have any policies against the phone. I think we had to put our phones in baskets whenever we entered the classroom. But you could tell that it was a distraction in many ways, and everyone was talking about what was on social media, and everyone was arguing about what was on social media. And I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't have it, but I was able to see, because I didn't have social media, how a different lens of how it was kind of translating into different people's lives. And that was really meaningful. And, I realized we haven't evolved to connect through a screen. We'll talk about that more. But we can have meaningful interactions online. And so what I like to say is that we've evolved to feel a sense of connection and belonging, but we haven't evolved to be reminded of it every 5 seconds through notifications. And when we're getting, as Bob said, when we're getting over 200 notifications a day and we're constantly expecting that, it can be difficult to not associate it with those expectations that you have of your self-perception and self-esteem. And those are a lot more deeper concepts than what we will be able to get to today. But so we're really only scratching the surface. But March 1st was when I got back on social media, and I did take a moment of self-reflection, and I had the physical journal. And during this time, I was collaborating with a psychologist, and so he actually, as Bob said in the introduction, we wrote the book together. And I thought when I was writing it that, I had the structure, I had the journal entries, I knew what I wanted to implement, but I also knew that there were these little holes in the story that I wanted to tell and that I wanted to present. And I was worried I didn't know how I would fit it in there, but the story unravels as you write it. And that, I think, is what made it so powerful, is that, you had the narrative, and then you had the science with Dr. Gandor, and then we both sort of collaborated on some other topics as well. And it was an incredible journey. And so after this period, I found I was more consciously aware, and it was like I was taking off a blindfold. And so I have social media. I'm not anti-social media or anti-technology. I believe that there's a technology piece in the way we design technology to be thoughtful, and I think there's an offline piece in the sense that we have a responsibility, and kind of we have these roles that we can play to educate ourselves and others about the challenges of this. And so the key takeaways were that I was was more creative. I wasn't bombarded by all this extra stimuli. Um, and and that doesn't mean that whenever technology and social media is in our lives that we can't be more creative. It's about being intentional with where you choose to put your mental energy. And now I find that I can be creative when I want to be, because I'm putting my mental energy into things that allow that to sort of percolate. Um, and so I did find the true meaning of human connection, and I developed these healthy habits. And my communication skills I found expanded. And of course, all of these things can't extend tremendously in just a 2-month time frame, but I noticed these small, sort of minute changes that over time, when they're practiced religiously, they do make a difference. And one of the greatest things is that there's beauty in privacy and not feeling compelled to share a bit of your life every 5 seconds. Another one that's not on here is I developed a higher tolerance for boredom, and just being still and not feeling the need to be stimulated all the time. And so now we're going to kind of look at the state of play around what's happening right now with social media, and what's most popular. And so YouTube continues to be one of the most popular social media platforms among 13 to 17-year-olds, followed by TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. Obviously, Facebook among our age group tends to be more less popular. I don't know
It's
if you
more
also
for the elders, correct?
we do see that, and I think I have a thing on this. Yes, yes. So here's a graph that's showing that mothers use Facebook more than fathers do, but fathers tend to use LinkedIn more than mothers do. So that's another topic of looking at how do these platforms, how do they attract different populations, and why, what are those appeals, and why is that happening? But this is sort of the state of play right now in terms of which platforms are most popular, and it's true that there does seem to be a lot of prevalence in terms of screen time, and it's doubled almost constantly over the years, and teens admit this. In fact, they're quite self-aware about it. And if you ask them, they'll say, yeah, I spend a lot of time on this, and it is a problem. Some of them may not really understand, but it's all about giving people the tools and the resources that they need to create a healthy relationship with it. And it's the self-awareness that is the beginning of that. And so, yes, so then we just come back to this, that there are different platforms that seem to appeal parents, and parents are also on social media, and it's this is something that is affecting everyone on an intergenerational level. And there are parent-child arguments that are sparked because of this topic, and there are ways to relieve those arguments. We won't really get into that today, but that's a whole other topic. And so we've seen an increase in mental health conditions and feelings of depression. Self-harm has increased. Suicide has increased up to 150%. And these are really scary numbers. And I think that I thought I had a graph in here that was showing, kind of right around the time social media started to arise, mental health conditions started to increase as well. So there was that positive correlation. But that doesn't mean we can say that social media is causing this mental health epidemic that we are in. We just don't have enough data on that, nor may we ever truly know. But what we can say is that it might be one of those contributing factors. And this last bullet on here, the term phantom vibrations, I don't know if you all have ever experienced this, but this is something that is very common, where you think that your phone is buzzing, but it's actually not. And sort of like a hallucination of some sort. And it's kind of like it's like when you think you hear someone calling your name, but it's not actually there. It's sort of like that, but with your vibration of your phone. And so now we're going to kind of talk about the social media algorithm, and the sort of tactics that are involved in this that seem to really make us continuously engaged. And so the main question that these tech companies are asking is, what can we do to get their attention immediately, number one, and then what can we do to sustain their attention? And so it's really a question of attention and trying to hide those blind spots that don't even make you realize that you're on social media for so long. And so there's science behind this, and we're going to talk about it. And so this is the concentration challenge, which is something I usually do with kids. We're going to skip over this so we can do that. We can focus on other topics, but this is a fun game that I like to play with younger kids, where they can kind of see the role of the social algorithm at play, and it's usually a good conversation starter. And so how does persuasion play into social media, and why is this a factor in increasing engagement? Well, we have two different process routes to persuasion. We have superficial processing and we have central processing. And superficial processing is influenced by these cues and heuristics that are easy to understand, that are interesting, that are emotional and vulnerable, and might tap into some of our biases. And they're automatic, and it doesn't take a lot of mental energy to understand what's going on. And so social media uses a lot of these, and we're going to talk about the specific ones that they use. Central processing requires more mental energy and cognition and thinking, and it's backed up by data and statistics, and it's very controlled. And so if you think of the Super Bowl, whenever they are playing those commercials to you, they're very entertaining commercials. They're using a lot of this superficial processing, when there's a lot of emotional appeals, cues, and biases that are going to get your attention really quickly. So this is the question, how are we going to first capture their attention? And so these are the four factors that determine this automatic thinking: efficiency, intention, awareness, and control. And we can apply these factors as to when we're using persuasive technology. Is it consuming a lot of mental resources? Probably not, which is why it's so easy to keep on scrolling and digging for that dopamine, that pleasure hormone that we crave. Did you activate the trigger, or did the situation? And so sometimes, these certain cues, such as the ding and the lighting up of the phone, these are factors that can activate a trigger that make us want to interact with our phone. And so there's a lot of sensory elements going on. You think about the last time you went into a tech store and look at these sort of behavioral persuasive techniques that are going on, and you notice that they have these devices that you can touch and interact with and have a sense of control over. And when you're holding it in your hand and you're able to sort of navigate it, even though you haven't bought it yet, it still creates that vision of potentially using it in the future. And the staff are very good and interactive. And so it starts in the store. It starts with the device. And so the phone itself plays a big role in entering social media platforms. And so that's why I like to kind of start at the device level, because you have to access social media through the phone or through your computer. And it's often what's happening externally, such as when your phone lights up or when you get that ding, that activates something, that activates that reward circuitry saying there's something there. Someone wants to talk to me. And so this is sort of how it happens. is the phone dings, and then it lights up, and then you open your phone and you see all of these. There's a lot of different things going on, and you have the colors, and you have the movement, and you have these very salient features. You have these particular pictures that are very in line with what you want to see, because every action you take online is being closely monitored and recorded. I'm sure you all know this, to create a more accurate identity of who you are. Even the duration of which you look at a photo is being recorded, to try to think about how they can get your attention the next time you're online. And so it's a very successful business model, and that's why it's been so successful. But it's good to know the kind of the psychology behind the algorithm and what's going on and why we keep coming back. And yes, and then you have the red hearts and the tagged you in a post, and so there's a lot of information that is contributing to your self-perception, social comparison, and this self-monitoring that's kind of like a sociometer of saying, okay, here I am, I'm being validated in this way, I'm good, my social relationships are good because social media is telling me this. And so it's important to separate ourselves from that, to show that it's not all, it's not all, lost my train of thought. Anyway, this is basically saying that newspapers and advertisements and billboards are very similar in operating in the same way as social media. The only difference is that social media is a bit more efficient. It's quick. It's giving you it can give you new information at any point in time. You have a bit more of the control and perhaps what you want to see. But these forms of advertising and marketing are also using these cues that elicit this sort of automatic thinking in your mind that you may not even be aware of. And in fact, you may be driving down the freeway and you're not really hungry, but then you see this billboard and you're like, that looks pretty good. And then you realize suddenly you're hungry. And so it's kind of crazy, how these certain cues have the ability to enact these physiological responses. And we are humans, we are very attentionally driven to these salient features. And social media is a very promising attention-based environment where it's like a slot machine. You never really know what you're going to get. So we'll briefly talk about misinformation, which, it's I'm sure you all are pretty educated on this, but whenever you're scrolling on Instagram and you see these posts like morning coffee habit may be tied to longer life and healthier heart, that's very exciting, especially for people who are coffee drinkers like me. It's exciting when you see that, but it's important to pay attention to the language. So if it's using very highly tied language, very socially direct language, that's something that you should probably double check, especially when you see this thing down here that says liked by Starbucks, and it's being reinforced by this huge coffee company, and it's posted by ABC News. Looking at these trust factors and these expert factors that might be contributing to your belief in the type of information that you're seeing. And so, these are just some examples of paying attention to the language. And so these are just some biases that might come up in how we use technology. Confirmation bias. The more we use social media, it's going to gather more information about us, and we're going to be seeing what we want to see, and then we're going to look for information that basically reinforces our beliefs, and so that can limit our different perspectives and different worldviews. And it's just important to pay attention to these biases. We won't spend too long on this, but also what's available and what's representative of certain concepts might create these stereotypes based on what we're seeing on social media, and it might not always be true. And so now we're going to talk about evolutionary psychology. And you may be wondering, how does our evolution play into the brain on social media? And it does in many ways, actually. And so I thought to sort of analyze this through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I don't know if you all are familiar with this concept, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a psychological model that basically says if you are able to attain all of these levels of basic human needs, then you will reach this point of self-actualization, which is your full potential. And there's been a lot of different critiques of this model in terms of what it actually means. Some people believe, it shouldn't be a hierarchy. It should be more of a holistic model where, you don't have to have your physiological needs met to feel a sense of esteem, but that doesn't really matter in terms of how we're going to explain it because of social media. And so in terms of social media, if social media has it creates this physiological response, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have a basic need as humans to self-curate our tools, and we have this drive for sensory stimulation. And so those two components together, if we think about our technology and how we are able to self-curate it to our liking, we're able to, change the brightness, we're able to personalize and customize and change and choose. We have this element of choice. And all of these contribute to feeling a sense of self-regulation and regulating the sensory systems. And so basically on the physiological level, we feel fulfilled by social media because it sort of quote unquote fulfills or makes us feel like it's fulfilling this idea of control and sensory stimulation. And it's activating three major senses: sight, sound, and touch. And so all of those together create a pretty powerful sensory response. And it's that first element that makes you go into social media to begin with. And so it's important to evaluate it at the device level. And then safety needs, you can kind of think about how social media might create the illusion of fulfilling this need, where we can find people who are like us, who match our similar interests, and find a community similar to belonging and love. We're getting this reinforcement from the notifications and from just the feedback that we're receiving about our posts. And in a lot of contexts, these can be positive things that contribute to a positive sense in well-being. And then we have esteem, when you're getting this constant reinforcement, it makes you feel good about yourself, and it's sort of clarifying that you are where you want to be in terms of society's expectations. What's the dangerous part of these is when you don't have, when these expectations are not fulfilled by what you want to see on social media. It can be like a little subtle jab where you start to question why is this not being reciprocated? And it's important to detach in those moments, and it's easier said than done, but it starts young. It starts, when children get social media for the first time and they're not educated on these things, it's really easy to fall into that trap, especially in topics of self-worth, self-perception, social comparison. And so it's really a combination of biological and sociocultural factors in terms of our attention and what we as humans are most drawn to because of who we are in the most primitive sense. And we've evolved tremendously, but humans stay true to these Paleolithic elements and emotional elements of their mind, similar to the fight or flight response. That's an evolutionary adaptive trait. And so very briefly, I wanted to show you all this I conducted a study in the fall of this past year where I was thinking, what if, we're seeing these sort of patterns in technology and dependence with humans. What if we were to look at this from a comparative perspective, and look at our not last common ancestor, our next of kin, and the most closely related species that we have on Earth with us right now, to see if it's eliciting similar responses. And chimpanzees are our closest living relatives right now, and they are incredibly brilliant, incredibly just intelligent. And I had never had any experience in animal behavior or primatology before this, but I worked with a primatologist, and it was an incredible experience. And I just want to show you all this chimpanzee here. His name is Kendall, and I put the iPad in front of the chimpanzee sanctuary to see sort of who would be coming up to the iPad, how they would be reacting, how it would affect their frequency of social dynamics. So I was recording, it was an ethnographic study, and I was recording their continuous behaviors. I had to record their taxonomy, but you can hear that he would spend several minutes just sort of looking at himself and mocking these behaviors. And he paid attention. He was able to focus. And there were moments where he would self-groom himself, and he'd look at himself. And they were very, very curious as to, what was happening with this device that's completely novel, and they're extremely exploratory. And one of the reasons why that's juvenile, so that's basically a teenage chimp looking at the iPad. And one of the reasons we believe that these chimps are able to pay so close attention is because they're incredibly brilliant, and they're able to focus for a prolonged period of time. And the question of technology used as a source of enrichment for chimpanzees is continuously being observed, just as technology is being observed with humans, and in terms of its benefits and challenges. But what we found in this experiment was that the infant chimpanzee was not at all attracted to the device by any means. And we believe a lot of that has to do with the fact that she did not interact with the device because her mother did not interact with the device. And so if we look at this from a comparative perspective in terms of parents and learning, phones and technology, it's a form of material culture. It's a tool. And we as parents, as we heck, like I have children, I do not have children, but parents, this is why it's important that they, kind of look at how their behaviors might be modeling what they want their children to also model, because during this stage in their life, they are incredibly receptive to observational learning and these imitative behaviors that are so translative. And so Kurt Gray is a social psychologist, and he is a professor at my school at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he wrote this essay where he was talking about, we've kind of misunderstood human nature for several years, and we used to think that humans were predators, but we actually have evolved as prey. And so there was this quote in the article that said, whether we're scrolling on social media or voting for a presidential candidate, it's easy to think about who's out to get us, and how are we navigating social media in a way that aligns with our preferences of what we really want to see, and how might this affect how we're constantly self-monitoring our behaviors online, and how that might increase self-monitoring behaviors in person. So that's just an interesting perspective there. And so I think, what we need to be doing is, this is sort of where we're going. In order to create human-centered technology, we need to think about human nature, and we need to think about what technology can amplify within the human mind in terms of creativity and critical thinking and deep thinking and connection. How can it amplify those things without exploiting them, without decreasing them? And it's easy, if we're thinking about social media, it operates in a sort of linear, sequential fashion where it's dynamic, but it's one thing after the other, and it's moving at a very rapid pace. And so if we were to think about a different world where social media was more expansive and allow these opportunities to dive deeper into particular topics, that might increase, how social media can be further used as a tool to help our development and these basic human skills that are so sacred. And so one of the most difficult things that we face with in today's time is that we have these minds that are true to our instincts, and we have this technology that is constantly evolving. And so that creates this sort of question of how we're going to balance that. And technology is a source of culture, and it's a reflection of culture, and it's a social tool. Social media is social, and it's important that we continue to make it that way. And so these are some sort of signs of dependence that you or someone you know might be starting to become a little dependent on social media. Social media addiction, that terminology is not necessarily used in the it's not a disorder or a clinical, it hasn't been described in clinical aspects, so we usually say dependence is better terminology, but I've seen situations where it has seemed like it's gotten to the point of addiction in some individuals, and they're seeking help and guidance. So if you have this anticipation where you're kind of always wanting to know what's going on, if you feel like you have this tolerance development, lack of control when you're scrolling, if you have withdrawal when you are not using social media, if you're staying online longer than intended, I feel like a lot of these factors are things that I tell the younger generations who may not be aware, but so I feel like that you all probably are aware of some of these things. It's just a matter of the struggle of actually putting them into play, and I struggle with that sometimes. It's difficult to be consistent all the time. And so we're briefly going to talk about more of the kind of neurobiological aspects a little bit. And dopamine is really kind of at the center of all of this. I don't know if this will play, but that's just kind of a sound effect that when you hear that, it is your brain has associated that sound from your phone with this sense of reward. And people think, dopamine, it's very misunderstood. Dopamine is it gives us pleasure, but it's kind of more so responsible for this feeling of craving and desire and wanting more, especially in ambiguous situations, which is why the anticipation is often greater than the reward. And so what that means is that whenever you get a notification on your phone and you don't know what's behind that notification, that is more exciting to us than the notification itself. So it's sort of like this idea of not knowing is more satisfactory than knowing. It's sort of like when you're if it's a slot machine and you're gambling and you don't know what you're going to get, you never know what's going to happen. That's why you just keep coming back. And social media operates on this intermittent reward schedule. You never know where that boost is going to be. And that's one of the reasons why you spend so long, why it's easy to spend so long on it, because you're constantly digging for that. But what we don't understand is that the more we dig, the more it increases that threshold for for the original amount of dopamine that we felt to begin with. And so that's kind of dopamine in a nutshell. And so there's, these questions like, is social media a drug? But the fact of the matter is, I'm not going to spend too long on this side. You can experience things moderately and not overconsume them. And so in moderation, social media can be good, but it's important to understand these cues that our bodies give us when we feel like we're kind of going into a trap. And cortisol is at the other end of this. Cortisol is our stress response. So it's this fight or flight hormone that's being activated. And the blue light from our phone actually activates cortisol. And, it puts our bodies in this physiological mode of reactance. And it's very powerful. So it's important to think about how it's affecting our stress response. And melatonin, many of you may know that that's responsible for our sleep. Blue light decreases, it sort of suppresses this hormone melatonin. And that's why people recommend not to be on your phone before bed, because it might be more difficult to fall asleep and you may not have as much of a deep sleep as you would if you kind of detach from a screen several minutes before bed. But of course, it's very difficult to do that, and so it's difficult to expect that completely. So there's melatonin, social media, and human connection. What we know is that when we're interacting in person, there's a greater physiological response happening as expected. Our heart rate's going to be higher. We're reading facial expressions, reading body language, thinking about our tone of voice, the pace of voice. There's all of these different communicative factors that are going on. And so it's more difficult and it takes effort. And it's also the most humanizing thing that we do is communicating in person. Even though it takes the most effort, it is also the most fulfilling and rewarding form of connection. And so what we worry about is that social media, it can get so easy to communicate through a screen in moments where we want that ease and that simplicity of having to we can edit, we can filter, we can manipulate. And that's simple. But talking to people, in person, it takes effort and it happens in real time. And so that's why, starting young, we sort of instill this sense of promise in our children that this face-to-face interaction is incredibly sacred. This experiment was done. This is an fMRI of a teenage brain while they are looking at a picture on social media with a high amount of likes. And what you're seeing here is this area in green is called the nucleus accumbens, and it's part of the brain's reward circuitry. And what this is saying is that when this individual was looking at this picture with a high amount of likes, the reward circuitry in their brain was being activated. And so this is kind of showing the vulnerability to our brain as being primed to associating a high amount of likes with reward. And so then we kind of think about, what does this mean in terms of the content that we're seeing? If we're viewing a particular image that is not ethical or not immoral or not moral, but it has a high amount of likes, what are are people responding to that because it has a high amount of likes and because they want to seem like it's accurate? Or so conformity is another kind of social psychological concept there. But this is basically showing the big picture here is that the nucleus accumbens is part of the brain's reward circuitry. Social media has an incredible ability to elicit this response and activating the reward parts of our brain. This is sort of the opposite that's happening. In this picture, an adolescent is looking at a picture online. In this this teenager is being rejected in some form, and they are experiencing some form of social rejection online. And this part of the brain is called the anterior cingulate, and it's responsible for feeling and detecting physical pain. And so what this is telling us is that rejection online is sort of at that same severity as feeling and detecting physical pain. And so you can kind of think about, if this is happening over and over again, what that could do to our well-being, if this is something that we are experiencing. And I once received a question where someone had asked, if they're receiving rejection online, does that mean that they're more or less likely to go back on social media? And I said, that's a very good question. And some people, still want to seek, what's going on in social media, how they're being perceived. And even if they feel like that they are being received negatively or not in the way that they expect, they keep going back because they want to continue to kind of monitor and understand why. It's that drive and desire. And they may not know how to detach from that. And so it's social rejection online and social pain are highly tied. And so we've explored, looking at social media on a longitudinal scale. How is this connected to individuals that, have substance abuse addiction, and social media addiction? Are they connected in some way? And what we do know is that our brains are malleable and they can change, especially in the younger years. And so if whether or not social media truly affects the brain in the same areas that a drug does, and whether or not we can have these long-term problematic issues with impulse control and memory and things of that nature, we don't know that to be certain. But we do know that during the younger years, and if we have the motivation throughout our life, our brains can change, which gives us hope to understand that our habits can change at any point in time if we're motivated and committed to doing that. And so these are just some strategies that you can use to practice digital wellness for yourself. You can do this thing called cold turkey, which is where you delete social media completely, and for a long period of time, kind of like what I did for 2 months, which is a relatively short amount of time to break a habit, but it was the minimum amount of time that I needed, and I wanted a good sort of short time frame to document behavioral change, and that was what I did. And so then you can do a short cleanse. You can do dopamine fasting, which is where you replace the dopamine you get from social media with other forms of dopamine, such as the sun or exercise or music, or having an authentic conversation, things like that. You can set time limits, which I've seen to be maybe not as effective, especially if it's muscle memory and you can just click extend, but it's a good, the thought is there, and I've seen some of my peers will use that, and it's good. It seems to work sometimes. Conscious awareness, that's just sort of the mental check that you have whenever you're online, where you can try to be in touch with your emotions and look up every once in a while and think, how long have I been spending? That mental element is important. Out of sight, out of mind. If the physical appearance of the device is not there, then it might be less tempting to use it. The eye level marketing technique, you all might be familiar with this if when you go to the grocery store and you see that they put the most expensive items at eye level. They probably don't do that by accident. They probably want you to, it's easier to grab that. And so you can kind of do the opposite with social media, where you put your apps in a hidden folder on your phone, and you try to not not use that. So that's sort of what I do, and that's been incredibly beneficial. And so what I do is I put my social media. I don't have it on my phone. I have it on my laptop. So if I want to go online, then I go on my laptop. And then just practicing, screen-free time, and that's designating these moments where you can have screen-free moments, and that is very beneficial. Another thing that I wanted to implement in here is this digital divide, this intergenerational digital divide that we have going on. And this is really important, especially as we create empathy between generations and try to reduce this divide that's going on. And I don't know if you all have ever seen, but if you go into an Apple store, they have presentations and workshops for people if they don't know how to navigate an iPhone, because it simply was not developed in their time of they're having to adapt to it, and that's why we shouldn't be frustrated with people who may not be as able to adapt to technology as others, because we're all experiencing this at different times, and we need to be receptive to that. These are some digital vocabulary terms that just might be helpful if you all have ever heard of them. You might have heard of a few of them, but especially some of them are specific to the younger generations. Ghosting is sort of, that's got its own term of when you have this connection with somebody, but then all of a sudden there's no context as to why it's sort of detached, and it's easy to do that, right? Because you don't have to face them face to face, and it's a problem, especially in terms of vulnerable moments that might be happening. Sharenting is its own concept that's been recently developed, where some young kids are getting upset about the amount of information that their parents are sharing about them online, and so that might spur some arguments, but that's just interesting that that's created its own sort of concept. Snapchat dysmorphia is where some people might request to look like the filters on social media, and they will request that in the sense that they will go to plastic surgeons and want to reconstruct particular areas of their face, and that's scary, especially when young people are doing that so early. Phubbing is the skill that has emerged more and more, where you are texting at the same time you are making eye contact with someone. And so it's sort of like this multitask of texting at the same time you're in a conversation, and it's highly distracting. I've been in conversations where that happens, and it's not the most respectful thing to do. In some cases, I understand that it is appropriate if it's warranted. Nomophobia is the fear of losing your phone. Phantom vibrations we talked about, kind of that hallucination of that vibration. Streaks seem to be a promising way of keeping you to come back, especially if there's that reward. Snapchat uses this. Duolingo, the popular language learning app, uses this technique. Catfishing is pretending to be someone you're not online. You all are probably familiar with that. Being left on red or open has a negative connotation, in the sense that if you are left on red or open, then that's not really a good sign. But double texting is its own thing. Like if you're and these are sort of terms that are specific to Generation Z that are going on that you may all not know about. But double texting is like if you send more than one text to your crush, you would seem too desperate or something like that. So these are interesting sort of digital vocabulary that have manifested in different ways, and there's always new concepts coming out about these different topics. And so the big picture is that it's not, social media is not going away, technology is not going away. It's going to continue to advance in incredible ways. And just like I said earlier, there's this technology aspect and there's this offline aspect. And how we design the technology and how we put thoughtful psychology and design into it influences our culture, just as our culture is a reflection of what's going on online. And so there's that piece, and then there's also the offline piece and our responsibility to engage in an intentional way and to translate that to different generations and create these bridges between generations. Um, and so that is all that I have for you all today. And I'm very grateful that you all listened, and we covered a lot of different perspectives in social psychology and evolution and biology, and it's just a different way to look at this. And I, of course, am incredibly grateful that you all valued to listen to this from my perspective. It's incredibly meaningful. And so I think I give huge amounts of gratitude to Bob for inviting me to do this. And I am happy to answer any questions if you all have, or happy to reconnect offline as well.
Well, Keegan, number one, thank you for taking the time out. I had to keep reminding myself as you were speaking that you're 20 years old, right? Because you are mature beyond your years, extremely intelligent, and to bring your voice to this issue and tie the science behind it is amazing. We have a professional up here on Long Island, Dr. Dewey, and he actually studies dopamine on the brain.
Uh,
I don't know if you've heard of his work, but I was just at a presentation where he said the dopamine released when kids are playing Fortnite is
yeah,
greater than the dopamine released when somebody uses cocaine. It's mind blowing, the science of what actually happens and gets back to what people are feeling physically. So it's amazing. It's scary. It's sobering. But as boards of education and policymakers and parts of governance teams, I know we have superintendents on this registration. We had over 100 people register. A lot of people are going to see this after the live event, obviously. I'm interested in your perspective, right? Because there's the big debate going on in New York State as far as banning cell phone use in schools and things like that. And, you gave us that one slide about, how to digitally cleanse or break away or, refocus. And the one slide, my big takeaway, your diet is not just what you eat, but
yeah,
when you're consuming social media, it's affecting your physical health. So that was a big takeaway. And the other big takeaway for me, something that you mentioned, and I'm a big fan of this, is you built a tolerance for boredom. There
yeah.
is something to be said for just silence and not filled with activities. So from your perspective, as somebody fairly out of the classrooms of public schools, K through 12, still in class, what would you say to policymakers as to an effective way to implement the policy that you get the necessary buy-in so that you're not standing there being the cell phone police, so to speak, and it becomes more of a issue of discipline.
Right. And that topic right now is very prevalent, and each, I would say, it really is up to the school, it's up to the institution of what they believe works best. And so, I would say I don't have all the tools to try to inform, what the best policy is. I think it's whatever works for the community and whatever is best for the student body. Um, I think that generally, I think, if we can find a balance between trying to allow technology to be a tool as a source of education in the classroom and not be a distraction, while also allowing kids and students to have the autonomy and the awareness and the authority themselves to know how to navigate it, instead of it being kind of disciplined for them all the time. If they're actively learning how to use it responsibly with proper barriers in place, and they're able to um, kind of break away from it when needed, I think that would be a good recommendation. So you have that self-awareness piece, and then you also have that applied piece of using technology as a tool, but then also recognizing that there's a time and a place for it.
Yeah. And my other takeaway is parenting. I recently became a grandfather, so I have to check in with my kids because I
Excellent.
probably share way too much of my granddaughter online than maybe they like or don't like. I don't know. But your thoughts about media literacy, right? Because this gets into whether it be social media or where non-elders are getting their news information from. What do you advise your peers and when you're talking and presenting to younger folks about the issue surrounding media or consumption literacy for what's authentic compared to what's just trying to get a rise out of somebody?
Yeah, that's it's. I think it's it is a it's a scary thing. I think it's important. I think we talked about misinformation online and looking at what is authentic, what is original, and staying true to yourself, in terms of not only how you are actively participating online, but also how you're passively interacting online, and those parts can be blinded sometimes, if we're in a highly emotional space, if we're constantly scrolling and being, you have all these attentional cues in multiple different directions, and so it can be easy to buy into false information and then not act authentically because of that. And so I would say to my peers, if you are recognizing that you are acting in line with your values, in terms of what you want to portray to the world, and what you're portraying to yourself by how you're interacting with the content that you're using, that is a key to being most authentic.
Great. And we do have a few minutes, so if folks want to pose a question, I could, just raise your hand or post a question in the Q&A. And if you raise your hand, I'm pretty sure I can unmute you and bring you on screen if you like. But Keegan, the last thing for me, and it kind of ties in, kind of doesn't, but this is another topic that educators are grappling with, is artificial intelligence, right? Where it's going and where it is already, and the impact on assignments and classwork and content, but more importantly, what you see online where images, Tom Cruise, being projected AI with voice and everything, and it really wasn't Tom Cruise, right? So, your thoughts as somebody that's studying this and you're very involved. Just curious about your opinion about AI and its use in the educational space.
I think, I mean, I just like everything. I think my motto is everything in moderation. And AI in the educational space has been shown to be dangerous and scary, but also an incredible tool, in terms of creativity, in terms of brainstorming, in terms of getting in terms of ideation and innovation. And so there's particular training, I think, that should be that should be experienced, by educators and by students at the same time, to know how to use it responsibly and know where the limitations are in making sure that it is not detracting from the originality of your work, but aiding in that. And I think in terms of participatory learning, maybe even incentive-based learning, those sorts of tactics, I think artificial intelligence can serve many purposes in making, learning fun and exciting. And we talk about social media, which is, it's a sort of, it is a sort of artificial intelligence in a way. I don't think it's not necessarily generative artificial intelligence, but it does, replicate similar elements to that. And, same with, sometimes video games and such. And so there are ways to implement these learning tactics that make learning exciting, where artificial intelligence can play an exciting role. And I think that technology, especially within my generation, a lot of people enjoy whenever it is implemented in the classroom.
Okay. And another thing for me would be if you're standing in front of policymakers, either state or federal level, or you are standing in front of policymakers on a local level for schools on Long Island in New York, what would be your elevator pitch regarding social media, cell phone use, and what would you, from an advocate or activist side, want us to be aware of that maybe we should be looking at from a policy standpoint?
I would say that, there's all these broad assumptions that are being made about technology and young people right now, and, that it's all really bad, or that, we need to be looking at it in extremes. But I think what I would recommend from a policy perspective is that there is a way to find the middle ground, and that there is a way to approach this in the sense that we can approach technology as a tool, and we can approach it as a leverage to connection and creativity and critical thinking. And at the same time, it is so powerful and so complex and so intricate that it can be a detriment in some ways. But that doesn't mean that we should negate its beauty or its power in fostering these positive elements. It just means that we need to create a balance in multiple different contexts, in education, in the home, in the workplace, and so it's a very versatile tool, and it's going to continue to advance and evolve, and we have these core elements of our human condition that it can amplify and that it can challenge, but we can make the most of it if we are intentional about it.
Great. And finally, if folks want to contact you or find out where your book is at or any other information about you, here's your little shameless plug and infomercial opportunity.
Well, you can find my book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It's 60 Days of Disconnect, and you can get it in hardcover and digital format. And you can also visit my website at www.keeganwlee.com, and you can contact me. My email is on there. I'm always open to have a conversation. Please do. Please reach out. Um, and yes, yeah, that's pretty much all the resources that I think would be insightful.
Well, you are a very impressive young lady that gave us a lot of food for thought this evening, and a couple of learnings for me certainly. Some of the information that you shared and some of the science behind it is fascinating, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing. Keep it up, and I'm sure we're going to hear more from you in the future as you, continue to do what you do down there at UNC. Listen, I know you're a Tar Heel, and that's okay. And I wish your team all the best. But thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for raising the level of conversation, and more importantly, raising the awareness, not just for us elders, but even for your peers. And I truly appreciate it, and I encourage folks to reach out because I think you are a very powerful voice, and there's something about a conversation peer to peer that is a little different than us having that conversation. So keep up the good work.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. And folks, once again, this recording will be available as well as the slide deck presentation that Keegan shared with us this evening. And we thank you for tuning in. And once again, our next webinar is going to be on April 22nd regarding cybersecurity insurance, keeping it all out there in the cloud and technology based, and how to stay compliant so you don't have a claim denied, and maybe some tips and tricks on how not to have a big major issue to begin with. So that's on April 22nd. Keegan, once again, thank you so much. And we appreciate the time this evening. And I appreciate everybody's time for logging in and those that are going to be watching this on demand. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll talk to you all soon. We'll be sending out a survey too, by the way. Be sure to give us your feedback about this event. Thank you.
Thank you.